watching the broadcast this morning in New York. I should say atmospherically and climactically. I've got some kind of rhinosinusitis or sinusitis. I don't know how it came about. It feels very microbiota peritrichus, but like vector mode of transportation being airborne in peritrichus format of like floaters with whatever causing whatever this is. So I know that, I mean, in New York, there's so much pollutants and contaminants that have just bombarded. I mean, like, I've heard other places they don't get sick. Like, there's no, like, common cold or, like, constant barragement or beratement of some form of nanotech that is like a biotech nanotech, just constantly plaguing the biological physiology until it gets into this disease state, and then it has to carry the burden of the disease and just gets I mean, it is just, how do you take down machines? Holy effing crow. So anyway, so I'm watching in this reduced capacity state at the moment. I'm not at optimal peak level. They start this morning at CBS at 7 a.m. At an aerospace time dimension of 11.36. They start with a commercial from Chevrolet, which actually looks like Chevrolet, like as if they let something happen. They've got clouds behind it. Reminds me of like Zeus and Hera. But the first story of significance that I found was the Pentagon. They say they're Pentagon level officials, but they're only wearing suits, which confuses me. I mean, I know John Kirby does when he's at the podium, but I thought that he conferences with the doodads and the lapel bling in the valise, the respectable valise of wool, of like high importance. But again, this gets confusing because there's no confirmation ever of how humans are existing in any capacity, with how they have me cut off in the field. So, the first is about some suits sitting in a room that I have no access to, talking about UAPs and UFOs. And they're in a mixed crowd. They're in a multi-complexion, like, arrangement at the table. So that gets confusing as well. They make a mention of it's the first time in 50 years that they're having some kind of review. Then it goes into this first alert weather with this pool. I mean, for a parallel, it could be gene pool because it says it's British, but it's got it doesn't have NIL qualified people swimming in the pool. It's just got some other whatever. And they're teaching the non-NIL British to turn on their backs and scream so they don't drown. This is century 20, year 22 in New York. And there are a higher ratio of the whatevers, both in sports, with a higher echelon megaphone and stegophone, and in the local area of those sorts of folks than myself. So they're heard at deafening decibel capacity, and in visual sight, they're everywhere. But while they're doing that, and nobody begrudges them, there's and that's at 11, that's 13.46. Then at 16.25, they talk about silent drownings. Then I go to CBS 8 a.m. at 24.22, because there's this Chinese immigrant who, at Hofstra, her last project to graduate, she had to create and engineer 2 arches. And she goes into how she failed. When she went to bake her project, it burned too hot. And so it warped them into something else, but she made the best out of it. And then she talks about her parents and their Chinese ancestry and how they've been here and whatever. And then I'm going to go back to the 7 a.m. broadcast at the 36.23 hour, because it talks about redistricting maps in New York. And lo and behold, there's 2 versions of Not Us who are now running for this seat. In this word Congress, which then gives them some power or control over the local area while I'm still here without a job, without a proper husband, and without the inroads to where I needed to be from the get-go. Then it goes into this transportation command operation and this fly formula. And John Kirby comes on, and he's in front of the podium, and he says there's actually a command set up for that. I had no idea. I'm like, so then my question would be, if I had a direct line somehow, if they had this fly formula already, like, in some form, and then a ULA, which I think is an NASA kind of a reference, of transportation, the gene pool in this design with this distribution vector, how did it come to be in this amount? And nobody in the transportation and the fly formula command, how did they get my part wrong? But yet they had to use their same transportation formula department to get all these immigrants into New York to cause all these problems. And I mean, the problems for me, I mean, I don't think they think they're problems for themselves, because they have some kind of like takeover going on, and I'm just like, it's an eyesore. But like, more importantly, how do I get to the person that I was built for? Because like, I really don't care about this New York thing. I mean, like, they seem to think that they're running something. So that gets confusing, how to verbalize that. And then there goes like the same old like local nobody's listening argument. There's at 18.11, there's a sports reference between some guy named Donaldson, and some other player who referenced himself as Jackie Robinson at one point, and then now he's saying it's racist, and I'm just like, yeah, you guys just love to antagonize and aggravate one another, don't you? I mean, it's just like, whatever. So that's a problem. And then it comes on with this astronaut level show called The New Frontier, and they're showing, like, they're teaching about solar weather and how it affects everything here. So I was building a better vernacular based on what the professionals have already learned while I was here in some, I don't know what I'm even called at this point, other than a victim. So I'm watching that and I'm like, right, okay, so they have all these fancy doodads, they have all this fancy equipment, they're building like all this really high bridge stuff, and then it's like, so who's manning the children and watching the children at Earth level, since everybody's like deep in a heliosphere, like way out between the sun and the Earth, and they're measuring and the solar weather, right? Yeah, okay, just so you know, you're failing miserably because the atmospheric pressure in New York is horrible. The breathing air is riddled with issues, and the microbiota is coming in every vector. I mean, it's coming, mode of transportation, it's coming airborne, it's coming by vehicle, it's coming by vector. It's a real problem. So anyway, so this is what it looks like when the humans try to create some kind of artwork to speak on whatever.
Well, are UFOs real? That was the question put before a congressional committee this past week. As CBS 2's Deborah Alfarone reports, lawmakers haven't held a hearing like this in half a century.
A U.S. Navy ship captured this video of blinking triangles in the night sky. For years, it was categorized as an unidentified aerial phenomena.
Interestingly enough, side note, like, if there's one kid drowning in a pool and all of the parents look like they're in some British swimming school just checking out those kids, but there's an American kid drowning in the American pool and she can't see lifeguards, and it's like she tried the back thing, she tried screaming on her back thing, and now she's just silently drowning. But everybody's over by the British swim school with nothing looking NIL appropriate to what used to be called British. And other genes are in the pool, fully clothed, whatever. I mean, like, how do we represent that in multi-complex issues when we'd like to have private communication, but multi-complexions are holding multi-facility and industry fights, and the one kid's still drowning in the American gene pool, in the American pool, and she needs a lifeguard. She just doesn't know how to get one when she keeps screaming and showing the problems, and it's like, what do you call that? She's been unidentified her whole life because nobody's actually done anything to go become a lifeguard and help her out. Everybody's all playing and looking in the British pool. That doesn't look right, by the way, because it doesn't look what else is calling itself British, so that gets confusing why everybody's learning how to swim and yell and do all this other stuff. Well, you got only one American swimming and yelling trying to get a lifeguard, but I mean, like, again, it's humanity in the 20th century. Nothing really makes sense.
Phenomena, or a UAP. Later, a similar image was caught off another coast. Officials now believe they're drones.
The triangular appearance is a result of light passing through the night vision goggles and then being recorded by an SLR camera.
This is one of hundreds of UAPs a new Pentagon task force is investigating.
Since the early 2000s, we have seen an increasing number of unauthorized and or unidentified aircraft or objects in military-controlled training areas and training ranges and other designated airspace. Reports of sightings are frequent and continuing.
Appearing before the House Intelligence Subcommittee, representatives from the group said they're
Now this is confusing because it says Mr. Scott Bray, Deputy Director of Navy Intelligence, and it's ONI. And then on this side it says the Honorable Ronald, and I can't really, Moultrio? And it says USD, and then it has an I and an S. Well, doesn't that get confusing?
And there's still no government confirmation of extraterrestrial life.
It's not about finding alien spacecraft, but about delivering dominant intelligence across the tactical, operational, and strategic spectrum.
But Pentagon officials admit there are no easy explanations for hundreds of UAPs, like this video captured from an F-18 military plane.
Actually, there is, because inside of this British pool right now, there's some teachers teaching all sorts of people how not to drown silently while there's an American drowning silently elsewhere. So there's an unidentified, like, frontier, whatever, organelle in the system. I mean, if we've got something in the vents, here we are.
The Pentagon says the number of reported UAPs has increased in the last year from 143 to 400. And they say one reason is their effort to encourage more pilots and military personnel to share their stories.
We want to know what's out there as much as you want to know what's out there.
After the
How do you keep anything classified and quiet and protected if they're nosing around and all this stuff, like the drownings, the unexplained drownings, when a lifeguard who might be a pilot, might be Navy, might be somebody really important in the somebody special category that actually had someone that loved them and took care of them and groomed them to then have a nice life. If that person needs to get to an unidentified drowning object in the field, but everybody's so nosy and needs to know what's going on at all times, I mean, it's going to cause more unexplained drownings.
public hearing, the witnesses and lawmakers met behind closed doors to discuss more sensitive national security issues. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, Washington.
Okay, 7:13, time for a check on your forecast. John Elliott live in Harrison, New Jersey with your first alert forecast. Hi, John.
Well, we have a few unidentified floating objects. No. We know what's floating and we know what's going on. So we are here. I got to tell you, we are.
Now, where he is, this is this British swimming school. They've got sports balloons in helium floating up top, and then they've got British life preservers, like in the round with the hole, like a donut kind of a thing, right over here with the flag. Oh my goodness.
We are learning life lessons at a very young age that could ultimately save lives years from now. So we're going to talk about that in a bit. Right now, though, let's get you poolside and ready for another hot day. First thing I want to do, though, is take a look back. We've had some very interesting weather over the last few days. And in fact, Friday was interesting because Friday was only 69 degrees. But remember, Friday in the afternoon, we had those storms push through? Well, the National Weather Service now confirming that there was a tornado. This was Friday afternoon at 5:09 in the afternoon. It was an EF0, enhanced Vegeta low-end scale, winds at 85 miles an hour. Right over.
They don't teach that at the level of school in New York that my children have been left drowning within. I don't know if they teach that at the swim school that only cares for people that don't qualify for NIL.
Right over the Garden State Parkway between Aberdeen and Hazlitt. So yeah, that was how we kicked off the weekend. Then we had all the heat yesterday, and we're going to see a repeat today. In fact, yesterday hitting 90, first of the year. Central Park first 80 plus, in fact, and 90. And it has been a while. I mean, you had to go all the way back to August of last year since we... How young do you start teaching kids to swim?
We start at 3 months old.
3 months old.
Yes, we do.
Why is it crucial to get kids in the water young?
So it's
And they're in a place, this British swimming school's in Harry's son. Oh my goodness. Daniel's son is Harry's son.
crucial to get them in the water young because it helps them with their motor skills and it also helps them with their cognitive skills as well. The skills that they're learning in the pool not only will help them with that, but as they grow older, it will help save their life. We're teaching them how to roll over on their back at a very early age. We find that in over 90% of the cases where we find children drowning, they're found face down. So what our mission is to teach them how to roll over on their back so that they can breathe and call for help when they're old enough to use those vocal cords.
Well, I think this is great, and also...
Now, what's interesting is, as a parent, you have to have money and income in order to even be able to look for these resources to get your kids involved in. I don't have either. So now there's more people who are already here that weren't here before. They now have jobs, income, foundations looking out after them. They've got some naturalization process where they're learning stuff. And the kid's mom who's drowning in the American pool by herself, now the kid's drowning in another generation in this American pool by themselves. And there's some British swim school going on that totally is ignoring the one American that needs help. In that the original British looks very NIL with the American, so then that gets kind of confusing.
I don't see typical swimwear. You also have them in clothes, or you have them in more clothes than they normally would swim in, right?
Yes, because when an accident happens poolside, we're not always prepared. A lot of times children are falling into the pool with their clothes on, and it's definitely a different feel than when you have your bathing suit on. Cotton and the weight of clothing is a lot heavier than the swimsuit that you have on in the water. So what we do here is we put them in a real life scenario. So their first time experiencing this is in a controlled environment, so they can learn how to navigate the water with those heavy clothes on.
This is so smart. We're going to talk next half hour, too. There's a real simple, catchy catchphrase that you can teach your kids, and you should know yourself. So, going to tell you, I'm learning a lot, Cindy. And there's a towel waiting for you. So, right now, we'll send it back to you in the studio.
John, thank you very much. It is set.
Now, the 8 a.m. At 24.22 on CBS had this Hofstra engineering student. This is what this looked like.
Celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander heritage. And this morning we introduce you to a first-generation, soon-to-be college graduate who's spreading an important message at a Long Island university. As CBS 2's Carolyn Gussoff reports, she turned a mistake into a work of art.
At the Hofstra Library stands twisted plastic that was, by engineering standards, a failure. Senior Esther Zhang was tasked with designing a structure to complete her degree, but in the months-long process, it failed.
Pretty much. I just wanted to create like this large-scale arch about like 12 foot in span, something that people could walk underneath.
Her 3D printed mesh creation was supposed to form a perfect arch, but in the baking process, it overheated, sagging to the ground.
It was very disappointing because I had like worked for so long.
It was devastating, right? We saw that the piece had not performed as we'd hoped it would.
The project now stands as a symbol for college seniors. She made from it 2 smaller arches and named it Resilient.
It took a lot of resilience, I think, to make it through these 4 years.
College interrupted seemingly endless COVID challenges.
It took a mental toll. Just being stuck at home was a big factor that I think made us feel like our college career was like robbed from us.
Resilient means the ability to...
Oh, I know what feeling like 40 years was robbed for me since somebody redirected someone who was not necessarily predestined to be in my area in large quantities, but now all of a sudden, like, the whole geospatial matrix just reshaped itself in some really overbaked way that warped time and space, and now it's a whole nother kind of problem with egocentric and whatever in some quiet and angry, seething place.
Reshaped without breaking, adapting to change. The two arches now make a point.
You have to be adaptable.
I just want people to know that they're capable of so much more than they know.
Adaptable just means you're moving, in my case. It doesn't mean I'm a healthy specimen. I've been plagued by so many biological confrontations and computations and bioengineered products, not because I signed up for it, not because I'm getting paid for it, not because I wanted to be here, because they took me as some prisoner of war or a missing in action while they went on and just ignored the situation completely, like totally making it worse.
They know, and there's so much in them that is able to push through to the end.
She credits her parents, Chinese immigrants, with instilling the lessons of resilience. 3 daughters, all first-generation college grads.
Even though their entire life and family is back home in China, they stuck it through all these years for their children so that we could have a better life.
An experience that not only shaped a college project into...
They could have a better life than what? Because they've already enjoyed a better life than I ever got.
...to a work of art, but is also shaping a lesson for the entire Hofstra community. When things don't go as planned, pivot. In Hempstead, Long Island, Carolyn Gussoff, CBS 2 News.
Great lesson.
Not really. That seems to be what Mayor Adams and however he got into office, whoever bought his chair in this warped scenario, keeps saying. Now back to the 7 a.m. broadcast at 36.23 is this piece on redistricting maps. So just so the kids who learned to roll onto their backs and scream for help because now they're technically no longer drowning, while the American is silently drowning for 4 decades. Here's what this looks like.
New York's new redistricting maps have been approved, and it's already triggering some changes.
Approved by who? Where do you find out about this? Are they approved by the correct parties? Are they approved by this warped engineering project that was baked too long? It gets confusing, like who's really in charge? I see there's transportation, there's a transportation command, according to John Kirby. Not that I have real access to him to verify that, I can't confirm or deny that, but he seems to think there's a transportation command. Then why does transportation command not have better field education for the American drowning in the pool, in the gene pool that's NIL, with something else that's important in an RH negative ABO? Why am I left here all by myself when Transportation Command had some hand and some formula and form in the ULA in order to make New York 20th century 2 decades, 2 years look this way and perform this way in a war theater that nobody's talking about?
Congressman Mondaire Jones, who represents the 17th District, announced he will now seek to represent the redrawn 10th Congressional District. And New York Assemblymember Yuleen New says she'll run in the 10th. They join former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, who announced on Friday he's also running for that seat. The new maps were approved late Friday and were...
It looks a little bit like a pool.
An outside expert after Democratic-drawn congressional maps were thrown out by a judge. Parking problems at major airports are leaving some passengers.
And it looked to me, when I looked up real close, like there's the Statue of Liberty. They have, within this 10th district, they have the Statue of Liberty trapped. Because it goes over the water. So I don't know if John Kirby, he's in charge of war theater important somewhere in the someone special category and like a lifeline of someone that's face looks familiar and I have a name attached to it. in case he has friends in high places and can get a word through that New York's turning really frightening in their big symbolic gestures, and how they've all learned how to turn over and float and scream to let everybody know they're not drowning. Well, the American is like lifeless and having trouble. Okay, this is at 34:55 about this baby form ULA and this transportation command and how I learned about it.
14 pallets are expected to arrive in the coming days. The Biden administration has named the effort Operation Fly Formula as it struggles to address nationwide shortages of baby formula.
U.S. Transportation Command knows how to do this. In fact, they know how to do it better than anybody in the world. And they understand the tasking. They'll find the right sourcing solution.
The country's largest formula plant.
All right, so at 18:10, on comes this sports version of an argument that took place because, again, in the real world, I mean, in a pool by myself, I don't really have access to knowing what the conversations in like a locker room or locked away whatever echelon is actually speaking of, and there's no way for me to figure that part out.
18 in sports, Yankee slugger Josh Donaldson is accused of making a racist remark, and the Mets lose to the Colorado Rockies.
It's so annoying because you have this big group that learned how to roll over and scream that they were drowning, like when there may have been a chance that it was truthful. And then you have this silent group that was taught that that was going on and to be civil about it, which whatever. And then it's been 4 decades. And I'm starting to think they got this word that they put together, RACIST, but I don't really think it was taught right, and I don't even know if it's a cognitively dissonant word or if it's apropos. It's getting really messy with the messenger system because every time somebody stands up and says something, like, I mean, if the other people are found to be guilty of something, they throw out there like this word as if it negates the problem. And like it's like a magic eraser word, which then fuels an even bigger fight.
In a doubleheader split, here's Steve Overmeyer with your CBS 2 Sports Update.
Good morning. Yankees third baseman Josh Donaldson is currently being accused of making a racist statement to White Sox player Tim Anderson, who is black. Donaldson admits he called him Jackie in reference to Jackie Robinson, but says it's a running joke between the two players.
Now, this also is really key because in the New York area, there's a lot of musicians who grew up with themselves all over the hot 97.1 radio dial in New York. They had like their own like New York thing going on. That's like where Biggie Smalls was on, like whatever. And so they all got real famous from that one brand. That sometimes the Zoo played, and like it was like a whole big whatever. If you were in New York, you knew who Elvis Duran was by sound, not by face necessarily. They sometimes would say these words, especially if you bought the album and the record from the record label with the license, not necessarily in the car, because sometimes they'd bleep out these words because someone made it that it was a curse word. But yet they walk around on the street calling each other that. They have like their own private like street thing going on, street slang, like whatever. And so that gets confusing because then as a white kid, you're like, well, is that an appropriate term to use? Like, do you just not ever? I mean, like, they use it. Are you supposed to? Is that a sign of respect? Is that a sign of, like again, humans, I can't figure them out.
The incident overshadowed DJ LeMahieu hitting a grand slam in the second, leading the Yankees to a 7-5 victory. But it's what happens after that's the story.
Because it almost feels like, oh, if they're buying our music and they're making us, like, this big thing, like, yeah, why not? You're part, you're one of us, right? And then all of a sudden they're like, they get, like, an inkling that you're actually something else, and then they're like, wait a minute.
At the end of the third, Donaldson and Anderson are caught arguing, and the two had to be sent to their dugouts. Then a couple of innings later, Donaldson and catcher Yasmani Grandal getting into it. Benches would clear, no fighting though. Anderson had to be held back from his teammates. After the game, Anderson and Chicago White Sox manager Tony La Russa called Donaldson.
Now this is interesting. They're all wearing hats like this. I'm like, whoa.
Out for a racist comment, Donaldson giving us his side for calling Anderson Jackie.
First inning, I called him Jackie. So let me give you a little context of that. 2019, he came for the game, right? And 2019, when I played for Atlanta, we actually joked about that. Like, my meaning of that is not any term trying to be racist. Obviously, he deemed that it was disrespectful. And look, if he did, I apologize. Like, that's not what I was trying to do.
Now,
seemed whatever. I don't understand why they make such a big deal out of it. Now, like, here's, like, I mean, this, to me, I mean, like, Donaldson and his argument looks like street cred, street fight, street lingo, jargon, New York area, where I've been held. I then look at where other people are living in a reality with some other campus and institute and whatever, and it's like a whole new world.
Space weather is the field that studies how what's going on the sun affects us here on the Earth in our.
Now, this is like where I should have been held and brought to as far as like corralling me and guiding me into a field where I could meet others and keep myself interested in humanity. But it's not what happened. But I know this still goes on, and I know that it's still very relevant to what's broken in the field.
Our near space environment and on the space environment on other planets. The effects of space weather are so complicated.
Because, like, it feels like the people who are so involved in this, they have tunnel vision. They don't want to hear about sports. They don't want to hear about a fight that broke out. They don't want to hear about universal relevance in larger symbolic process where there's manifesto, manifest destiny, and then there's the manifestation where the war theater actually plays it out based on where the pivotal creatures are or the pivotal pieces are in the pagan god system. Where RH negative is being held and that rack and pinion is so crucial to how the rest of time and space is warped around it and what then comes out the other end. I have no idea why such smart people refuse to do the operation that needs to be done.
Because we have to understand what's going on at the sun, as well as all that stuff traveling through interplanetary space, how that affects us here on the Earth and throughout the heliosphere, that we need an entire fleet of instruments to look at these various effects. It's basically a system science, so you understand one part of it in order to understand the other part of it, and you have to put that whole puzzle together to understand the full effects of space weather.
Alright, so great. Now, another human confirmed what I've been doing. I've got space weather going on down here that's really damaging to the physiological.
GOES-P is an ongoing series of Earth observation satellites that happen to keep a constant eye on the sun, monitoring this space weather.
So when the spacecraft's sitting in space, it's looking down at the Earth and it stays stationary like this. But this solar array out here moves and tracks the sun, so that way it's always looking at.
Now I'm just curious, the kid that's holding the cardboard, does she need a psychological evaluation for being some kind of like NASA level scientist? Because she had a better upbringing and actually got to a groom where I didn't? Just curious. Because I think the psychological evaluation actually needs to be on the crew at space and on the ground that allowed me to be held away from the person that I was destined for, originally an Rh negative ABO.
Looking at the sun and can take a scan every minute.
The sun's outer atmosphere is constantly being heated up by the solar surface, and this causes particles from the sun's atmosphere to stream away constantly. These streaming particles, which are filling our entire solar system, are called the solar wind.
Different phenomenon from the sun is constantly bombarding the Earth. Although you might not know it, the solar weather affects you every day down here as well. Not only just astronauts, it affects people on Earth.
The latest generation of GOES satellite is the GOES-R, soon to be launched into orbit. Other low Earth orbiting platforms include ESA's microsatellite Proba-2, testing new technology, and PICAR, sponsored by CNES, the French space agency.
Only time I've ever heard of the CNES is right here in this, like, I don't know. I mean, for me, this is a teaching tool, but I don't know, in somebody else's mind, it might be a sales tool. I'm not quite sure.
Hinode is the Japanese word for sunrise. It is a joint mission between JAXA, NASA, and ESA to study the sun's magnetic cycles.
And again, at, like, Donaldson fighting with some guy who references himself as Jackie Robinson in the field of, like, nobody specials, even though they got somewhere, somebody liked them or looked favorably upon them. It's really difficult because I don't even know. So now that's a Japanese, that's French, and something else are all in this one like, again, like, we don't keep track of that stuff. Nobody tells us anything. But I got real problems with solar weather affecting ground control. And then on top of that, there's the socio-psychotic political circus, bread and circus going on with, like, the Me Too generation, where they all think if they shout loud enough and they float long enough in somebody else's gene pool, that, like, they'll just keep getting further and further ahead. But I know somebody has responsibility to the one American kid silently drowning. Somebody has to. Star 1978, Star 8378, Nicole, Cattaruzza, it's Earth, Solar System, Milky Way, Universe, Galaxy is broken, and it's Bayside Station, Bayside, New York, 11361.